to, um, I, I like explaining to people how fog exists and how in the summer, the Central Valley air heats up and hot air goes up and cold air from the Pacific Ocean rushes in, especially through the Golden Gate, uh, in the form of fog and wind. And yeah, it can get pretty windy in the summer.
Why the coldest winter is the summer in San Francisco is a saying because of the wind and the fog. So people that don't
Right.
know what fog is, I've had people go, "Is that smoke?" I'm like, "That is not smoke. That is fog." So
And
Yeah,
to
I
our viewers, listeners, Rob and James in Northern California right now. So,
mhm.
the one time I was driving across the Golden Gate Bridge with somebody, I don't remember who, and somebody they looked like they were from India, and they were, the wind was whipping and the fog, and you couldn't see more than 50 feet off the bridge. And I said, those poor people, they probably saved up all their lives to come to, San Francisco,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now they're walking across the Golden Gate Bridge and they can't see the city.
Mhm.
And whoever I was with said, well, you never know, maybe they've never experienced fog before and they're just utterly amazed, and this just made their vacation. So
Could
you
be.
just never know.
Those of us that live here don't like it.
Right.
So,
all right, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm Rich Swerbinsky with Onward and Upward Consulting, and this is the Big Picture special Halloween edition today. And as always, very pleased to be joined by my esteemed colleague and co-host, Rob Chrisman. Rob, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. I guess I should have worn a costume or something.
Are you dressing up tonight? Any big Halloween party plans or anything?
I do have a really neat shirt, and I was going to wear it in Denver. Um, no, this morning was tootling around with my granddaughter, Cosette, who's 16 months old, and my daughter teaches at St. Patrick's in Larkspur, seventh grade, and so they had a big Halloween parade
Nice.
at St. Pat's, and so Cosette got to walk around in the parade. She was dressed as a little piglet.
There you
And
go.
then, of course, trick or treating tonight. That's you figure out Halloween's much more fun for kids than it is for some, 45-year-old, going to some Halloween party. Anyway,
And this
we
week,
digress. We digress.
we digress, and we're very, very pleased. Very special guest joining us this week, the CEO of NextHome, James Dwiggins. James, thanks for joining us today.
of course, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Looking forward to it as well. And Rob, so much going on right now. Where do I start? Fannie and Freddie, 7.1 billion in profits in the third quarter, somehow with no mortgage volume. Your hands up, Rob.
I think you need more of an introduction for James, because if somebody
Well,
hears the name of the company, they don't know if that's a realtor, they don't know if that's a mortgage company, they don't know if it's a company that has an interesting take on the lending environment. I was hoping James could talk a little bit more about what the company does.
Yeah, thank you. Next Home is a real estate franchise, started it about 10 years ago. We have about 630 locations across all 50 states, about 6,000 agents. We do about 12 billion in volume in sales. So we're a sizable player in the residential real estate space, third generation in the industry. So my grandfather started his real estate company in 1967. Both my grandparents were brokers, both my parents were brokers. So I'm an SOB. And it's been an interesting time. Certainly, our industry has gone through a lot of change over the past few years, and I know we're going to dive into some of that. So,
love it, love it. So Rob, Fannie Freddie, 7.1 billion in profits. You're probably not going to touch that one. The World Series ended last night. This jobs data is screwing up mortgage rates, but forget all that, Rob. Two things I want from you in the intro here. One, your take on MBA annual that you just got back from. And two, as a noted junk food enthusiast, your favorite Halloween candy.
Well, let's start with that one. So there's a heated debate this time of year, Rich, where you have supposed experts saying that the different colors of candy corn taste different. Some people say they taste different, and other people say they all taste the same. Do you have an opinion? You ever even heard
I
this?
thought it all tasted the same. Yeah, it's
I
very
don't eat candy
divisive.
corn. So, yeah, Uh,
I think, well, look at Ira chiming in with right or left Kit Kat. Ooh, as I understand it,
And your
candy
presidential
corn,
endorsement. Yeah.
it all tastes the same, I think. It's just a matter of the dye. The dye doesn't have any flavor, but I think it's all tastes the same. I like candy corn, frankly, but if you were to look in my backpack right now, there were plenty of Kit Kats that were going around in the exhibition hall in terms of, the bowls, and I availed myself to some of that. So, uh, and then the first question, the NBA annual, in general, I thought, to be frank, well, not even be frank, I thought it was very well organized. In fact, I was in touch with Marsha Davies and I said, this is one of the better conferences, I think, from an organizational perspective. It looked like things were flowing smoothly. The space was laid out well, even though there was 2.2 million square feet of exhibition hall, 12th largest in the nation. It didn't seem that bad in terms of, you didn't need necessarily a bicycle to get around as long as you gave yourself some time. The exhibition hall was good, and I saw a lot of folks. It was well attended. I'd say the mood was better than what people think is going to happen to the industry. And what I mean by that is, it's always nice to see your friends, one big happy family, right? It's even though it's a big industry, it's relatively small when you come right down to it. And I think that the mood was very, very good, constructive, and so on. Not a lot new, if anything, came out of it. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac talking about green bonds and talking about some of the other things that they're up to, but nothing earth-shattering. I was in a capital markets committee meeting and people were very confrontational with regard to the confrontational to the folks at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac about raising their guarantee fees just because it's a Wednesday, and that's something that companies can't hedge against, right? When the agencies come out and they say, oh well, we're going to raise our guarantee fees by 2 or 3 basis points, well, that's a direct hit to lenders, unfortunately. And you can't go back to the locks that you have in your pipeline and say, oh, we're going to worsen your price by this amount because our investor did. You've extended that guarantee to borrowers, so it is a tax on companies. So people were making the point to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's representatives who were there, hey, at least give us some notice that you're going to do this. Don't just come in and have a cup of coffee and then send out an email. And then the other point that they were making to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is we can all sit here and, you can create these buyer programs, but until you create programs that help the industry construct more homes or people sell homes, it's not going to help much. So, you can talk about first-time home buyers and how you're going to help them and down payment assistance programs, but until you help people build homes, uh, or builders build homes and offer programs, construction loan programs that truly help, then the builders are going to lag by millions of units and continue to do so. So that was interesting seeing that interplay. But overall, the mood, I'd say the optimism that we saw a couple months ago has dissipated to a great degree. I think the general feeling is that rates are going to stay here for a while. And, if you like rates where they are, good. If you're betting your career on them coming down, you might be out of luck. So there you have it in
what
a
time
nutshell.
frame? What time frame are they estimating that rates will? I mean, estimates continue to change, obviously, depending on who you talk to. But are you seeing rates hitting the high fives by the end of next year? Are we thinking higher longer?
Yeah. So James, I like to say, I don't even know what I'm having for lunch tomorrow. Compared to guessing what rates are going to do 6 months from now, we could have it all lined up, and then a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, or there's
I
a
get
drought
it.
in
Are they
Kansas.
revising those? Are they revising
Yeah,
their
they,
forecasts?
Mike Fratantoni and Joel and Marina were there, and basically they think rates will be in the fives, uh, toward the end of next year. It was pretty funny. As a quick story, so Mike Fratantoni, not dropping names here somewhat, but Mike chief economist of the NBA, and he and I are walking down the street. It was at night, and this woman comes up to us, and I didn't know her, and he didn't know her, and she said that her friend over there, she points to her friend. She goes, "My friend tells me that you guys can tell me where interest rates are going." And Mike and I kind of look at each other, and Mike says, "Well, what do you do for a living?" And she says, "Well, I'm an underwriter." "And who are you?" And Mike said, "Well, my name's Mike." And I said, "My name's Rob." And she said, "Well, what are rates going to do?" And Mike said, she said, "What are rates going to do? Are they going to come back? I need them back in the threes because we need to get busy again." And Mike said, "Well, we really don't want the situation where rates go back in the threes because that's not a good thing." And she said, "Well, I kind of get that, but what's going to happen next year?" And Mike said, "Well, we expect rates to go into the mortgage rates to head into the fives toward the end of next year." And she said, "Okay, well, then we got to, you know, oh, well, thanks." And like, staggered off into the night. So that's what the NBA is saying. So
And you're not touch, you don't, the right or the left side of the Kit Kat, Rob? No preference there.
I never heard that before in my life.
Kudos to
I got to
I would
call
say.
Ira after this
Let's
call,
get-
figure out what the heck.
All right, let's get into some serious stuff. And James, really, really pleased to have you on the show. And as the CEO, really one of the leading real estate brokerages here in America, I want to start with just the NAR settlement fallout changes. As mortgage people, Rob and I have tried to pontificate poorly on it these last few months, prognosticating what we think is going to happen. And granted, there's been gobs of business, but what has been your experience? It's been what now? 2.5 months, 3 months since they became official. I'd love to just start with that.
Yeah. So, I think it's important to understand that there's still it's still very early to have a true understanding of what's occurring because everything that was in the pipeline before the 17th takes time to get through. So, it's important to kind of keep that in perspective. But there's sort of two camps that are going on in the industry. There's groups of brokerages and franchisors that are moving towards where the puck is going to be. And then there's a large group of people that are trying to hold on to the past, trying to find workarounds around the settlement, trying to figure out how to keep cooperative compensation in place. And candidly, it's messy. There's some of it's been business as usual, and it's also there's a whole new set of problems. And I'll just go down kind of a laundry list of sort of where things are. Obviously, post August 17th, agents are required to sign a buyer rep agreement if they're in an NAR governed MLS, which is about 95% of them. Which means that before they show property or look at any homes, they have to have a rep agreement signed outlining your services, your fees, what you do, etc. And then the buyer and the agent agree to that. Enforcement mechanism is the multiple listing service. Is who's supposed to be enforcing that? No one has any idea. No one's asking for a copy of the buyer rep agreement. So there's no scenario where anybody has any clue whether agents are actually doing that or not. Where you have state required mandatory buyer rep agreements. There's 16 states across the US that already had mandatory buyer rep agreements before you at least submit an offer. It's fairly standard, so it's not an issue because the agents have been doing this to some degree already, but you're looking at the other states where this is new, where agents are trying to figure out how to do that. There's a lot of messiness with the agreements. Some brokers are using their own forms that they created. Some are using the association created forms, which has and can have a lot of issues with them. And there's every variation in between. It can be exclusive or non-exclusive contract. It can be for one listing, could be for the day, could be for the month, 2 months. There could be no recourse to get out of those agreements. So there's a lot of messes. There's a big mess around this process right now, and people trying to figure out sort of what they want to do and how they use them. There's this idea of a touring agreement. So it's not a buyer rep agreement. It doesn't outline your fees. Those are debatable whether they're legal or not under the settlement terms. And then the issue is, the National Association of Realtors, who I'm a supporter of, I've also been critical when they deserve it, have not done a good job of guidance on what to do and what not to do. Ironically, yesterday they just came out with very good guidance that not just what to do, but what not to do, outlining all the things that people in some cases are doing that they should not be doing. So hopefully that starts to correct some issues. You know, the buyer rep agreement portion is also a deeper issue in that, you know, agents are modifying them. The whole concept, and this is where I'll go deep for you. The whole reason why the buyer rep agreement was required to be signed prior to showing any house was to eliminate steering. The idea being, I sit down, we consult, we have a conversation, I outline my fee, you're agreeing to pay that fee, or we have a conversation that the buyer, I can't afford to pay that, and then we say, great, I'm going to put it as part of the offer process, we'll make it part of the negotiation. But the idea is that fee is set. There's been horrible guidance done across the US by even some associations saying that you can go back and request the buyer modify that if the seller is offering more money. No, you cannot. That is completely wrong. The point of setting the fee in advance is to make it so that there isn't any influence to change or try to push a buyer to a certain property where a seller is offering more compensation, or for an example, a builder's offering a bonus. There's builders on the line, stop doing that. You can't do it. You can do it, but the agent isn't supposed to take it, and technically you're actually influencing steering, which the builders don't realize they're going to get themselves in legal hot water continuing to do that. And so there's been a lot of misinformation that the agent can go back and have the buyer, you know, amend the buyer rep agreement to a higher amount. No, you can't. And so there's a lot of stuff here that's an issue. I'll give you another one. The buyer and the buyer agent, or the agent and the buyer agree to a fee. Title's not asking for a copy of that. They don't actually know what the fee was that the buyer and the buyer agent agreed to. So if an agent on the other side is doing cooperative compensation and they're just doing a set amount that they're still paying out, technically the buyer agent could be overpaid because they're not supposed to be making more than what they agreed to in their contract. I mean, that's just the start of where the mess is become in it. And then the big one, and I'll stop there and you can ask questions, is on cooperative compensation. So just for everybody here to understand what that is, make sure listing agent is collecting a fee for their services and a fee for the buyer brokerage and sharing that compensation. That's literally what got us into this litigation to begin with. That is still allowed under the settlement, but what people don't understand is that anyone doing it is going to get sued in the next class action litigation. So what will happen is the plaintiffs are going to wait for a new class, because that's what these greedy lawyers do. And they're going to sue anybody doing cooperative compensation. And I'll give you the reason why this is a new class. Everybody knows that the buyer and the buyer agent, the fee that buyer agent charges is going to vary based upon how good they are, how professional they are new or they are experienced or not, and that fee will vary. You're all nodding your head because you understand. If you're doing cooperative compensation and you're collecting a fee in advance of an offer and you're telling and advertising that fee out there, and let's say the fee you collected is higher than the fee that the buyer agent's charging the buyer, you've now told the buyer agent what to request as a concession in the offer. So above and beyond what the agent was charging, they're now actually requesting as a concession. You're screwing your seller. There's no scenario in this new world where an agent should be advertising any amount of compensation in advance of an offer, because the agent on the buy side can only request what they agreed to in the contract. So you should wait for an offer to come in. The class will look like this. Everybody doing cooperative compensation, they'll get a copy of the listing agreement. What they charge is cooperative compensation. They'll get a copy of the buyer rep agreement. The difference becomes the damage. Now you have a new class of litigation on amount probably bigger than Burnett Sitzer. And so you've got brokerages and companies who've moved away from cooperative compensation, Mine, EXP, Real, a bunch of others. And then you have a large portion of the industry that's still doing it, who are putting themselves into potential litigation down the road. So there's a lot of stuff coming, is the point.
So James, you said NAR released additional guidance yesterday?
Yeah, they clarified a bunch of things yesterday. It just came out. So for example, telling you can't modify your buyer rep agreement up. Like, you know, there's been state associations who have been telling their members they can, and now NAR is like, no, that's not actually how the settlement operates. Defining what is steering. So, you know, a lot of times, unfortunately, agents that haven't been trained properly, if they'll ask the listing agent, are you offering cooperative compensation? And the listing agent says, you know, we're not, in advance of an offer, the buyer's agent will tell the buyer the seller's not offering any compensation. And so then the buyer goes, well, maybe we shouldn't make an offer on this house because I can't afford to pay your fee. Versus they're not offering compensation in advance of an offer, but that doesn't mean we can't request it in the offer. Let's just find the house you want. We'll make it part of the offer process. We'll negotiate and get it cleared up. There's just a lack of training going on when you've got 1.5 million realtors who haven't been trained the same. There's a lot of misinformation being done out there that's causing issues. Telling the seller that if you don't offer compensation, then you know, agents won't bring buyers to see your property. That's steering. So there's just correcting a lot of this guidance. And I'm not ragging on our industry, to be clear. This is a lack of training. It's just trying to move this tanker ship away from a practice that's been in place for 100 years to this new practice, and trying to get all of these people who are part-time practitioners who do 1 or 2 deals a year and haven't been paying attention for 5 months to learn about these new policies is a process. But it is not, it isn't, you know, I read an article and you probably saw it, Rich, where Barbara Corcoran's like, oh yeah, nothing's changed. I'm like, you're an idiot. You have no idea what you're talking about. There's actually a ton of problems and you're just not in the business, so you wouldn't know. But there certainly is a lot of stuff that needs to be cleared up. I do think it would take more time for some of this stuff to shake out. So
Did you find, James, that real estate agents were looking to loan originators, whether they were banks or IMB or credit union originators, for legal advice or advice on how to deal with things, or were there enough resources put out by the National Association of Realtors that gave them guidance and they didn't need to turn to lenders?
well, I don't know if it's one or the other. I don't think NAR did the best job in the beginning on guidance with things. They're playing catch up now, and part of that I think is because they made some changes to their legal department over the past month. Certainly, there's been a lot of guidance needed from lenders on how to structure offers and understanding, you know, when you're going to ask for a concession. You know, what is it? Is it what IPC amount is that going to affect versus not? If the seller's still paying the buyer brokerage fee, is that still customary and then can essentially be financed in the loan? There's a lot of confusion around that, which, you know, the MBA and NAR clarified through Fannie and Freddie. So some of that stuff early on got cleared up. I still think agents, I mean, I've said this on a couple of mortgage podcasts I've been on over the past month. The best thing any lender could ever do is just get a hell of a lot closer with your agent base and offer a lot of training around how to structure these things, what's going to win deals, what's not, what's going to pass depending upon the loan type. So I think there's been a lot of collaboration that's occurred. I don't think they've gone to lenders for how to work around the settlement. Candidly, I don't know anybody that's done that, but certainly around the mortgage element, absolutely. And there was a tremendous opportunity and still is, because remember, I said this conversation with a friend of mine who runs a bigger company than mine. He was like, I've got this massive number of agents, I think it's like 76,000. And he goes, 20,000 of them are educated because they're in the business. I still got another 50,000 that do 1 or 2 deals a year that are going to come ask me questions when they're like, oh yeah, I've got a deal. And again, mortgage lenders could be working those relationships heavily to be there and advise them in that particular process. So it's kind of a combination of both.
James, if Trump wins and puts one of his golfing buddies at the head of the CFPB, who's going to be in charge of policing the bad actors? And I mean, did you worry about that?
You know, look, I mean, I'm not going to get too political here, but I will simply state it's important to remember. Actually, I'll just say it. I don't like either candidate, so let's just throw it out there so everybody knows. I'm in the camp of we could do better as a country, but let's just have that answer. The entire DOJ investigation started under Trump. Like, people seem to forget that. And then Biden took over and then it escalated and we've had all these investigations. But for clarity, the whole thing originated under the previous administration. So there's this idea that things will be better under Trump. I don't know. Nobody knows. Certainly the Department of Justice, I think it's fair to assume that Trump doesn't like the DOJ. And will go in and dismantle it to some degree. But I always have to remind people that the original investigations started under the Trump administration. So this idea that it'll be better, there's a lot of people that expect that to be better under a Trump administration. I am in that camp. I do think and I'm hopeful that if it is a Trump administration, that he does pull back some of this stuff. Now, to your comment about CFPB, that's not the arm that's been really heavily involved in our aspect of our industry. The Department of Justice has been the one investigating everything. And so whether the CFPB is involved, I don't know. Currently, the enforcement mechanism thus far has been, remember these cases were all civil cases. So that's a civil matter that needs to follow from the settlement terms. Whether the DOJ files their own lawsuit against others in the industry other than the National Association of Realtors is left to be seen. I just don't know yet. I would argue that another 4 years of the current direction for my portion of the industry, residential real estate, I have very big concerns. We have been just crushed with a lot of investigations. The Department of Justice is, in many cases, misinformed. People there sometimes don't understand our business very well. Clear cooperation policy, which is a big discussion right now. The DOJ went from not liking it to, I think, starting to learn that it couldn't be more of a pro-consumer policy that exists in the industry. So I don't know. We're obviously waiting this out. Certainly NAR's tactic is to, their whole DOJ thing is up at the Supreme Court, see if the Supreme Court will take it to remove all of this stuff. We just don't know. We just don't know. It's certainly going to be an interesting 4 years to watch. So
I know you said you're a supporter of NAR, but to what degree have they, though, kind of lost face, I guess, with just, Joe real estate agent across America? And does that maybe inhibit their ability to educate realtors and others associated on the matter?
yeah, NAR has got some pretty serious credibility issues it's working through. They went around for a while talking about how they were going to win these cases. I was in the camp because I've spent a lot of time studying these lawsuits. 2 years ago, I said we weren't going to win this. And it just goes to when the judge ruled this as a per se case versus a rule of reason case. We were doomed, essentially. It basically says you're guilty. You have to now show why you're not. And it's just a process. But NAR settled. They didn't do well. They did a pretty horrible job of communicating what they were planning to do with what we call the $2 billion club. Every real estate company that does more than $2 billion, mine included, we didn't know about anything until after it had occurred. The formula that they had created in the settlement on how we would settle with the plaintiffs would have bankrupted every single company, literally. And so there's certainly a lot of things they're trying to fix, which is extending an olive branch to that group. And as you've seen the headlines, we're all settling for large amounts of money and giving up a lot of cash to do so. And yeah, it's definitely had some credibility issues. Nakia Wright, I've spent a lot of time with her now. I've interviewed her on my podcast. It's a really great interview. If you guys want to check it out, you'll get to kind of get to know her a little bit. She's smart. And she's not from the industry, which a lot of people think could be good or bad. I'm impartial right now. I'm supporting her. I think some fresh perspective from outside the industry might be good on how to clean things up within the organization. But it's no secret that NAR is bloated and it's just got a lot of money and it operates like a conglomerate and it needs some restructuring. And I think that there's a good chance she'll do that. The biggest issue that I have is our industry is very emotional. They're upset with NAR, but this from the MBA side. NAR is a powerhouse in DC, and our advocacy efforts that we do are incredibly important for homeownership rights in this country. I do worry that a weakened NAR will allow these idiots in DC to put policies out that could affect, private property rights and things in this country that drive the largest amount of wealth possible. And I have concerns about it. I do. I worry that people will be reactionary about paying NAR their dues and not thinking 7 to 10 chess moves ahead of how important those 65 people on the advocacy team running by Shannon McGann are working and consistently in conjunction with MBA to make sure that that DC doesn't put policies out that affect what we're doing. So I don't know. Yeah.
And then James, with the advances we're seeing in technology, changing buyer behaviors, a lot in the mortgage industry have pontificated. What is, in your opinion, the future of the buyer's agent in America if we fast forward like 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, so I talk about this a lot in keynotes I do around the country. I'm going to give you a couple of things to think about. So in 2001, the use of a buyer agent was 69% of the time in the United States. That was before Zillow was even formed. Zillow was formed in 2005, just for perspective. Okay. Since 2001, we've had the advent of the internet and this massive amount of data available to consumers. Everything you could possibly want to know is available pretty much on a property. You can search for properties. You don't need an agent to do it. And yet the use of a realtor last year was 89% of the time. So
By buyers.
correct. So you have this, what we think is all this technology would replace.
But is it, James, to what degree is that because buyers, for the most part, haven't been paying for it?
No, well, you could argue they've been paying for
I
it.
mean, not directly, not directly like they're supposed to be now. It's obviously changed, but I'm just trying to get your sense of how maybe,
Yeah, just preliminary for your knowledge, 98% of the time the seller still pays compensation for the buyer's agent. Just for perspective, we can talk about that if you want more detail. Why I don't think that has changed is because, for example, how many of you, when you get sick, go to WebMD to try to diagnose yourself? And 90% of the time, yeah, you think you have cancer at the end of it. And the doctor's like, yeah, you have a cold, calm down. So like, I'm being a humorist, but my point is there's a lot of misinformation out there. Number two, and this is the most important thing, I'm going to give you two incredibly important stats. 1960 dual income households in the United States was around 30%. We're almost 60% now. So in order to live in this country, mom and dad both have to work. If you have a 3-year-old like I do, who's a terrorist, I love her dearly, but like we have just lots of things going on in life. Nobody wakes up and goes, hey, I just want to go do the loan on my own, or I want to just go buy a house on my own or sell my house on my own. Nobody has that kind of time. Secondarily to that, this is an infrequent transaction. So you'll buy and sell property 2 to 3 times in your life. It's a complex, it's incredibly expensive. It's also very emotional. That's the last part I want to make. It's a very emotional decision. You're buying a house not just because of the investment, like men probably think a little bit more on that side of it, but from a family perspective, you're going to raise a family there. It's much more emotional than what you're buying. And agents spend a significant amount of time dealing with that emotion. That's like half of what a realtor's job is to deal with all the bullshit and keep a lot of the bullshit away from the buyer and seller so they don't freak out. So I think you couple all of that, and I don't think buyer agency goes away. Now, do I think there'll be different business models? Absolutely. There have been since as long as I've been born. Help You Sell was founded in 1976. That's a pay per fee model, like pay per service, whatever you want done. It's never captured a lot of market share in the United States. Redfin has been a discount model. They're moving away from that. It's taken 15 years. They still haven't figured out how to become a profitable business. Purplebricks came over with a fee worth $3,995 from the UK. We're bankrupt in 24 months. Foxtons was 10 years before that. My point is Americans generally like to pay for full service. I want to get everything taken care of, which is why I think loan originators are still important. And so I'm not suggesting that the models won't change. I'm not suggesting that technology won't make things more efficient. I'm not suggesting that it won't make things easier, but I think it is I think people are incredibly naive to think that someone's just going to want to do all of this via artificial intelligence. I'm not going to AI buy my house. Like, I just don't see that happening. Not for at least the next 10 years. Maybe generationally that might change. But I still have a financial guy. I'm smart enough to do a lot of the stuff on my own, but I want somebody who spends all of their time looking at the market to manage my portfolio. So I think these models will shift in how we're compensated, but I don't think it removes somebody helping you through the process. That's my opinion on it. So,
yeah. And we had a good follow-up question in the chat from Tabi. We are seeing more formalized menus of realtor services being offered at varying compensation rates. What happens when a buyer wants to move from a more limited services broker comp plan to, say, a full service where the comp is double? How do you adjust for that? Do you terminate the first compensation contract and write a new one?
You would have to amend your buyer representation agreement. That's correct. Yeah. Uh, I think there's, by the way, you're going to hear me think I'm nuts, but here's what is happening. For a year, I've been saying that when you decouple compensation, seller's agent's charging the seller for their fee, buyer's agent is going to charge, buyer's agent is going to charge their fee. How that's paid is a conversation we'll have momentarily. But what's interesting is I have stated for a year that good agents will charge more because instead of them having to rely on what the listing agent collected, they're going to curate their own experience. And I can tell you that is exactly what's happening. So really good agents who can articulate value clearly and explain what they do are going to the buyer and saying, this is what I charge. This is why. This is the service level I offer. These are the things that I do. Some of them offer premium services. I'll talk about that in a second. And then really shitty agents who can only basically get people to join them based upon price. In absence of value, all you have is price, are charging less. So you're seeing this variance. So compensation's coming down as a whole. Statistically, it would, just based upon the amount of people that are in the industry versus the people that do a lot of the business. But the people that do a lot of the business, their actual fees are going up. And then the comment I was going to make, I think there's an incredible opportunity for a Ritz-Carlton experience. Meaning there are tons of wealthy people who want somebody just to handle everything. Pack my house, unpack my house, organize the kitchen, sell the house, get the landscaper set up, and charge me more. I don't care. I just want to be able to leave my house and move into my next one. And I think there's a percentage of the market of people who are willing to, the people who stay at Four Seasons and Ritz-Carlton who want that premium level of service, who will pay premium for something greater than what's currently offered today. So it's a matter of what you capitalize on.
I would agree with that, James, to some extent. Although if you look, I don't know what percent of the market is, so let's say more than 1 million or more than 2 million. The average first-time home buyer, and there aren't a huge number of first-time home buyers, but lenders try to cater to those first-time home buyers. I don't know if they even know that they want a Ritz-Carlton.
Well, I'm not referring to first-time home buyers. I'm referring to
Right.
the top 10% of the market. But my point is, I think there's an opportunity to do a higher level service. Look, if you look at any study, Ring Central just came out with one. I'm going to get the number slightly wrong, but like 50% of people will pay a premium for service. 60% will pay higher for a better convenience, and 80% of companies will shop for a company that offers better service, because service is what everybody cuts. Like if you look at any company, we move all the service overseas. You've got, chat bots versus talking to a live person. Who here wants to call Verizon and get on the phone with a rep? Like, oh my God, I'd rather shoot myself. So my point is, I think there's a premium for service because people want to have that. And not everybody, and I think the majority of people can't afford it, but I'm simply saying I think there's a market opportunity for that. So, yeah.
James, the other end of the housing spectrum, the lower, the affordable housing end, really one of the few things that two presidential candidates agree on is, ways to create more affordable housing, opening up federal lands, maybe as an aid to that. Anything, just your take on the issue, if there's any programs you think that could make sense, either that have been stated by one of the candidates or not, or anything in the offing potential that could really help the affordable housing crisis kind of we have in America right now.
Well, I mean, builders, I don't agree incentivizing buyers is the issue. I think that's honestly stupid policy, in my opinion. We have a rate lock issue, which we're all aware of. I don't need to explain to your viewers that. But, I was talking to somebody, and like 46% of the cost to develop houses in Northern California is the permitting fees and everything else that goes into it. Why the hell would I want to build something if I'm going to spend 46% of my cost on permits, going through the idiots at the planning department and everything else? Like this, there's no incentive to build. This is, in my opinion, and I'm not an economist, but I talk to a lot of them. This is and always has been supply and demand economics. And until we make it easier and build the amount of housing we needed, which, as you know, is estimates from anywhere from 2 million if you're looking at multifamily to 7 million if you're looking at a single family, we are not building enough based upon household formation and population growth in the United States, period, the end. We got caught up in the last go around from 2008 upward. We just weren't building anywhere near enough. We're still behind, and the cost is too expensive. And we're dealing with that. And until we figure out how to make this process easier and more affordable, builders won't do it. I have not heard any policies, in my opinion, that get to the root cause of we need to incentivize builders to build more properties in a way that is allowing them to still get profitable. Like that's just what they're looking to do, which is why they're building properties in other areas other than like California and other states that are too expensive. So this is just that issue. On the other side of that, by the way, which I think was really funny, I had Ivy Zellman on our podcast, and she's the only
Ivy.
one. What was that?
It's Clevelander, a former Clevelander.
Yeah, she's amazing, by the way. And she's the only one saying that if you actually look at the numbers on the way that population decline is occurring in the United States, meaning the lack of household formation and the lack of children that we're having, if you go down that road about 10, 20 years, we actually have an oversupply of housing already in the US, especially as the baby boomers age out. So it's just an interesting conversation, but right now we've got a shortage. We just need to incentivize builders to build more properties. That I don't know how to put it either way. So
interesting. Yeah. And then
I'm in a Toll Brothers house. I live in a golf course community in a Toll Brothers house. This house, in my opinion, anywhere else in the United States would be worth $1 million. It's 3.6.
No. I remember having a
It's
conversation on this
stupid.
show with Rob. I bought this house 3.5 years ago, was terrified I was buying at the top, and it's gone up like 200K.
It's stupid. I don't even know how or where all this money's coming from. Just, I mean, in the Bay Area, it's kind of, sort of rhetorical, but there's just not enough housing being developed. And because there's so many people, the prices are continuing to go up. This house is not worth that amount of money.
Yeah.
So,
And James, something that wasn't on our show notes, but just thinking about it, one of the things I work on with my consulting firm with some lenders are marketing services agreements and joint ventures between mortgage lenders and real estate brokerages. I'm sure you have a lot of your franchise owners that are, part of those. MBA came out recently with a white paper, urging a modernization and a relook at RESPA Section 8. Just curious how, from the real estate side of things, you look at that. From the lender side, a lot of lenders are just terrified of marketing services agreements because it is so gray, so opaque, things that are, commonly legal. But just because of the opaqueness of RESPA Section 8, is that something that is an issue for your world?
I mean, look, I remember prior to all of these RESPA rules when, title companies were giving agents Mercedes and all sorts of stuff to direct their business. So take the pendulum on one side.
Mm-hmm.
We've obviously swung the pendulum too far the other way. Right now, the only legal way that I'm aware of to do, when I say legal, like depending on your risk level, but to just stay completely compliant is, you can have somebody own stock and then obviously they can receive dividends from ownership in a business. I do think it needs to be looked at. I'm understanding and aware of the fact that we don't want to steer people in a direction, and that's certainly an issue, especially if you're incented by that. But I think there's plenty of ways to disclose that and allow people to understand what's going on. We already have an ABA that has to be signed anyway. So I do think it should be looked at, but I also don't want to go back to the way things were. So to me, it's like anything in the United States, which is like our political system, we kind of just do this pendulum thing, some sort of like middle of the road, like somebody who's just kind of like finding some logical path to it would be nice, but
Logic, that might be a little too much to ask for. Yeah.
I mean, then we would also have logic in politics, and we don't.
Right.
So yeah.
Any other trends, James, you're seeing in real estate, just more broadly outside of things we've talked about that are either keeping you up at night or have you excited from an opportunity standpoint?
There's definitely, one of the things that's interesting that's happening is there's a lot of change in the business model of brokerages are feeling pressure. The real estate business itself is more of the tail wagging the dog now, where agents are in control and brokers are fighting based upon splits and compensation. I think you've only begun to see some of that. Companies like EXP, where they're virtual, is allowing them to be more competitive in the space. I do think you're going to see somewhere between an additional 20 to 30% of the industry go away, which is needed. Too many people license anyway. I do also think you're going to see the states step in, and you'll see more state regulation and guidance to enforce bad behavior and have repercussions for it. Because in most cases right now, the repercussions for most things is a code of ethics violation for NER. 95% of agents have never even read the code of ethics, even know what it is. And so to me, I think you're going to see a lot more state regulation come in. And I'm not a big government guy, but I actually kind of agree with this to some extent, that there needs to be a little more tightening of what we're doing in the industry. How do we hold people accountable more for their actions? There needs to be actual accountability in some cases. And that'll cause consolidation and give brokers more control versus the agents kind of feeling like they get to do what they want. And if you don't like it, they'll just leave and go to another brokerage. So none of that helps consumers. So I think you'll see over the next few years a lot more of that. I think you'll see consolidation. Certainly more mergers and acquisitions in the real estate brokerage space. And then the big thing is CCP right now. That's a big one. That's the big topic. So clear cooperation policy, for those of you who don't know what that is. So basically a rule that requires when you're going to publicly display a listing, you have to put it in the MLS within 24 hours. That policy was enacted in 2020 because there was a lot of agents that were holding inventory off market and trying to bring their own buyer and double in the deal. And it obviously harms buyers and sellers. To be clear, if it's not on the MLS, which is literally the open market, the greatest system ever developed in the world, which means it's not on Zillow, it's not on Realtor, it's not on Homes.com, because that's where they get their data from. You're essentially, you're shrinking the buyer pool and people who could see it. You could have fair housing violations and issues because you're controlling who sees properties and who doesn't. And then on sellers, it's statistically proven by countless MLS studies that off MLS deals sell between 5 to 17% less than when they're on MLS. That is a policy that is in massive debate right now. There are some companies who want to get rid of CCP because they want to be able to do more in-house deals, double end deals, et cetera. And there's a significant contingent of the industry that doesn't want to see that policy go away because it's very pro-consumer. I fall in the latter camp of it's pro-consumer. We've spent 20 years building the greatest marketplace ever in the history of real estate. And remember, most countries don't have an MLS. Most of them don't. They don't have anything close to it. And so I worry that we're infighting because of lack of inventory and lack of deals to do, that greed takes over. And this is a hot debate. The Business Insider just did an article on it. It's a big topic within the industry, and NER is trying to figure out what it wants to do with that policy. So that could be a domino effect of massive shift in our industry, or it could be kept with maybe some modifications, but it helps protect consumers from being able to go and find any property for sale on any website, which is what we've got today. So those are some big discussions happening within our industry right now.
Well, great stuff, James. Very insightful, great conversation. And yeah, a lot of education for Rob and I and our listeners, mostly on the mortgage side, this show, something we've been talking about and wondering about, and good to hear some of the inside intel from somebody that's really close to it. And we really appreciate you coming on the show this week. So
thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And Rob, unless we're under martial law, we've got Bob Brokesmith on next week.
So when the election is finally determined in December, early January, I think we're okay until
January 7th, to be clear.
Yeah.
And to our listeners and viewers, thank you for joining us. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on podcast, we do the show live every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can go to chrismancommentary.com to get signed up for that live variation of it. And this will be on YouTube and podcast shortly after we conclude here. So
thank you very much, James.
Thank you, James.
Appreciate you having me. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks to everybody. And we'll see you next Thursday at 3. Have a great rest of the week and weekend, everyone. Take care. Happy Halloween. Bye, guys.
Have a good one.